Study Session 10, Parliamentary System of Government. Introduction. In this study session, you will explore discussions on parliamentary system of government. This system of government is opposite to presidential system, which we shall discuss in the next study session. We will begin this study session by looking at some of the definitions of the concept parliamentary system, then discuss the features, advantages and disadvantages of parliamentary system of government. At the end of this study session, you should be able to define parliamentary system of government, identify the major types of parliamentary system of government, describe the features of parliamentary system, and discuss the merits and demerits of parliamentary system. Defining parliamentary system of government. In contemporary time, government is organized along either parliamentary or presidential form, and the basic difference between the systems of government is the relation between the executive and the legislature. The task of distinguishing the systems is not a difficult one. While in parliamentary system, there is fusion of power, particularly in the relations between the legislature and the executive organs of government. But in presidential system, there is separation of power between the branches of government. However, it is no news that several scholars have conducted extensive studies on the subject parliamentary system of government. It is therefore pertinent to view some of the definitions that have emerged resulting from such intellectual efforts to stimulate our better understanding of the subject. In a parliamentary system, a clear distinction is made between the head of the state and the head of government, an executive and the executive. Here, the head of state, king or queen in Britain or president in India, possesses nominal or titular authority, whereas the real authority rests with the government, of which the prime minister is the head. The king or queen or president has a de jure authority, no doubt, and legally he possesses all the powers and privileges within the constitution, and laws may confer upon him, but in practice he exercises none. This is according to Kapoor in 1950, page 436. Thus, parliamentary systems usually have a clear differentiation between the head of government and the head of state, with the head of government being the prime minister or premier, and the head of state often being an elected president or hereditary monarch. The way the parliamentary system is being operated differs from country to country. For instance, in Britain, the constitutional conventions have stripped off all powers and privileges from the monarch except those considered to be ceremonial. That is the reason why people believe the monarch, as the head of state, does not err, because king or queen does not participate in government deliberations and decisions, but only performs ceremonial function. The government is formed by the political power which controls majority of the seats in the parliament, or parties in coalition that control the majority of the parliamentarians. The chief executive or president or monarch will mandate the leader of the majority parties in alliance to form the government. The majority party then appoints a prime minister and other members of the cabinet from among party members, and occasionally some of the ministers may be appointed outside the party if there are no constitutional provisions that discourage that action. The cabinet is charged with the responsibility of the day-to-day administration of state, both in the executive and legislative capacities. The Prime Minister, as the head of government and chairman of cabinet, according to Kapoor, 1950, performs at least 4 functions, which include: 1. He is the head of the ministry, that is, the government of his country. 2. He is also the leader of the legislature of the country, the one whose intervention in debates has the greatest weight, who states and interprets government policy, who is responsible for obtaining the approval of the legislature for the policy of his government. 3. He is the person through whom the head of state, king or queen or president, normally communicates with the cabinet, with the legislature, and ultimately with the country. And 4. He is the head of the legislative wing of the party and responsible for maintaining harmony with its organizational wing. All these are according to Kapoor in 1950, page 437. Considering the above-mentioned functions performed by the Prime Minister, one will notice 2 things. One is that there is fusion of power rather than clear-cut separation of power between the legislature and executive. This is because the cabinet members also perform legislative functions as members of the legislature. The second point is that the head of state, that is, the president or monarch, is only accorded with de jure power to perform only ceremonial or nominal functions, while the Prime Minister enjoys de facto power, whose functions cover not only day-to-day running of government within the executive capacity, but also some legislative roles as the leader of the majority party in the parliament. Types of parliamentary system. 1. Westminster system. This form of parliamentary system is more popular among the Commonwealth countries practicing parliamentary democracy. It is a parliamentary model that often attracts heated debates because prominence is given to the plenary session than the committees. This is to say that most issues are deliberated upon more during the plenary sessions than having the committees do the work. Thus, in such a situation, the parliamentarians usually engage one another in hot debates where each of them or a group tries to have strategic advantage over the others in form of articulation of superior arguments. 2. West German model. This model is otherwise known as Western European parliamentary model. It is the opposition of Westminster model because its debate system often takes consensual dimension rather than aggressor style of the Westminster model. The committees enjoy more relevance than plenary session. Therefore, most deliberations are done by the committees, whose members are fewer than the plenary, which consists of the whole parliamentarians. There is no doubt the fewer the people, the less hot the debates will appear. Features of parliamentary system. 1. The head of state is separated from the head of government. The president or monarch is the head of state with nominal roles and ceremonial functions, while the prime minister is the head of government who heads the cabinet that runs the government. 2. The president or monarch is usually elected through either popular mandates, that is, people's votes, or parliament, or hereditary principle, that is, in the case of monarch, while the prime minister, more often the leader of the majority party in the parliament, is appointed along with other members of his or her cabinet, that is, team, by the legislature, rather than through popular mandate or hereditary principle. 3. The ministers are not answerable to the president or monarch as the head of state, but to the legislature, through which the executive power is delegated to them. They therefore must work individually and collectively not to betray the confidence reposed on them by the Parliament, and which can decide to withdraw their executive power through votes of no confidence. 4. There is fusion of power between the legislatures and executive, rather than separating the power of the two. 5. The Council of Ministers is different and subordinate to the Cabinet. The Cabinet is chaired by the Prime Minister, who appoints few of the members who are most influential and important in the Council of Ministers. The Council of Ministers may have more than 50 members, including the Cabinet Ministers, Deputy Ministers, and Parliamentary Secretaries. Among them, the Cabinet Ministers may not be more than 20. 6. Party plays greater role in promoting a stable government. This is because it is the party that controls the majority of parliamentarian seats that will form the cabinet, that is, the executive. And here, the laws and conventions of the party guide the conduct of both the legislative and executive business or businesses. This may be one of the reasons for the high level of solidarity displayed by the leadership of both organs of government. 7. The principle of collective responsibility often paints the cabinet as a form of secret cult. The principle imposes absolute covenants on cabinet members to always work individually or together for their collective goals. Shortcomings of members or member are hardly discussed openly. Even when things are going worse, they pretend as if all is well. Thus, cabinet is appointed as a team. 8. The Parliament has the power to sack the entire cabinet through vote of no confidence. 9. To sack the chief executive is less difficult and less time-consuming, unlike the presidential system, which has great hurdles that must be passed before the executive president can be removed. 10. The president can dissolve the parliament on the advice of the prime minister, and new elections will be scheduled immediately. Merits and demerits of parliamentary system. 1. The system provides the opportunity for the easier passage of bills. This is because it is the same party that controls the legislature that must form the executive. But contrary is the case in presidential system. For instance, formerly in the United States, the Republican controlled the federal executive under the tutelage of George Bush Jr., while the Congress was controlled by the Democratic Party for having the majority seats. In this case, the executive in the United States needed to persuade the Congress, that is, the Parliament, so much before it could have its sponsored legislations passed by the Congress. But in a parliamentary system, the cabinet members also participate in legislative deliberations, making it less difficult to have its legislations passed by the Parliament. 2. It promotes harmonious relation between the executive and legislature. 3. It encourages cohesion and stability in polity, because the cabinet members act in unison, knowing that they came in as a team, and a sack of one member is tantamount to a sack of the whole cabinet, making to work together and discourage division. 4. It is flexible. This is because the Parliament can appoint a new Prime Minister at any time, for a particular purpose or the other. For instance, Churchill replaced Chamberlain as Prime Minister because national emergency demanded it, and this change was brought about without any political upheaval in the country. This is according to Kapoor in 1950. 5. It prevents dictatorship. 6. Political parties always articulate laudable programs in order to win more popular support, knowing that winning the majority of seats in the parliament does not only guarantee control of legislature, but also the power to form the cabinet. 7. Due to the above reason, people enjoy wide spectrum of educative values from the political parties, which arouse and increase their political intelligence. And 8. The system experiences frequent conduct of by-elections, and the results of such by-elections make the government to know the opinion of the public, which make the government to adjust and re-examine its policies if the opinions, that is, the election results, are negative. Disadvantages of parliamentary system. 1. The fusion of power, or simply non-separation of power of the two branches of government, the legislature and executive, can attract a situation where both of them gang up against the people, especially as the party directives pattern their policy. 2. There is limitation in the people's choice of the executive. This is because the Prime Minister is not directly elected by the people, but by the appointment. The situation may not actually allow us to know if the Prime Minister is a popular candidate or not. 3. Overwhelming power of the legislature does not allow any truly independent institution to oppose or veto its legislations, because the executive that is to serve such purpose also has its members performing legislative functions. 4. It can also be a source of political instability. This is because vote of no confidence can be applied unjustly against the cabinet, that is, the executive. And the Prime Minister, if fast enough to reading the antagonistic handwriting of the legislative wall, can gang up with the President to dissolve the Parliament. This situation is likely to threaten the political stability of the country. 5. The flexible nature of the system allows election to be held at any time, and having no definite election timetable can be abused by the political elite. 6. Weak and lackadaisical head of state. 7. There is absence of unilateral legislation initiative from the executive. 8. There may be absence of prompt decision making in the time of emergency or crisis. 9. The system promotes too much secrecy in government. 10. The opposition parties, in their quest to hijack power from the ruling party, can decide to employ some destructive methods like propaganda, subversion, among others, to have a strategic advantage. This is because of dual purpose of election: to control the legislature and power to form the cabinet in a single election. Study session summary. In this study session, you learned that the position of the head of state and government is split into two in parliamentary system of government: the office of the head of state, which is occupied by the ceremonial president, and the office of the head of government, which is led by the Prime Minister. We also noted that the Prime Minister is usually appointed by the majority party in the parliament, while the head of state, on the other hand, can be elected directly by the people or through hereditary means, that is, monarchy. We went further to note that two types of parliamentary system, Westminster and Western European parliamentary models. Lastly, we discussed the features, merits and demerits of parliamentarianism. End of study session 10. Thanks for listening.